everyone. Welcome to our first video lecture for our Quantitative Social Research Methods class as applied in sports studies. And for this specific video lecture, we will have an introductory session on the nature and characteristics of research. And this is our topic outline. We'll talk about ways of knowing, definition of research, characteristics, purposes, and general types of research. So every day in our lives, both in our academic and personal experiences, we are faced with many questions. And of course, these questions, they require answers. And if we are able to answer these questions, then we are able to acquire new knowledge. Now, there are different ways that we are able to address this question and acquire new knowledge or old knowledge in order for us to be able to inform the things that we are going to do in the future. Now, what are the different ways of knowing or methods of acquiring knowledge? So methods of acquiring knowledge or ways of knowing are the ways in which a person can know things or discover answers to questions. The first method of acquiring knowledge or way of knowing is tenacity. The method of tenacity involves holding on to ideas and beliefs simply because they have been accepted as facts for a long time or because of superstition. Like for example, there are certain habits that you do in your sports performances that, for example, you're wearing your favorite sock because that sock you think brings you good luck, and that's the reason why you're winning in your specific sport. And of course, there are many superstitions like this in terms of doing sports. But this is more of a tradition, and there are no really logical ways of explaining why they happen. So in the method of tenacity or tradition, information is accepted as true because it has always been believed or because superstition supports it. But we all know, of course, that these traditions, these long-held beliefs, don't always hold water. And like when we talk about sexism and racism, there were things that we believed that were true. Like for example, certain genders in sport are less capable compared to other genders. Or for instance, people of color are less valuable or less important compared to their white counterparts. These were, for a very long time, we've held them as true. But because of a lot of research and a lot of activism that we do, we know that these things are no longer true in our time. So the biggest problem with the method of tenacity is that the information acquired might not be accurate. And sometimes there's really no method of correcting or testing these ideas, like for example, your superstitions. However, this way of thinking or knowing or acquiring knowledge is still very much rampant nowadays in our everyday lives. Now let's move to the next method of acquiring knowledge or way of knowing is through intuition. So in the method of intuition, information is accepted as true because it feels right. With intuition, a person relies on hunches or gut feel or instinct to answer questions. And for many questions that we're facing in our lives, this method is the quickest way to obtain answers. Especially when we have no information at all and cannot refer to supporting data or use rational justification, that's the time we often resort to intuition. So I know that some of you sports people, you are able to think about your plays based on gut feel. This is what feels right at the moment, and sometimes it works for you, sometimes it doesn't. For example, in our case as healthcare practitioners, we already have what we call a clinical eye or a gut feel about certain people coming into the hospital. We can already tell if this person will be someone who's going to come up fully recovered or someone who's going to have a disability just by looking at the person for the first time. The thing about gut feel or intuition is that you need really a breadth of experience or a really long exposure to the phenomenon that you want to address in order for you to really come up with dependable answers. And if you're doing it for the first time, it's going to be difficult. And again, the use of intuition, while is very helpful, because I know that some of you were able to make decision based on your gut feel, and it worked well for you. But just like the method of tenacity or tradition, these things are hard to prove, they're hard to test. So yeah, that is one of the ways of knowing intuition. So the third way of knowing is authority, wherein a person relies on the information or answers from an expert in the subject area. So it could be your teacher, it could be your coach, it could be your mentor, it could be your parent. If the person is an expert in a subject area, it could be a textbook. So for many questions, the method of authority is an excellent starting point. Often it is the quickest and easiest way to obtain answers. However, the method of authority has some pitfalls. It does not always provide accurate information. For example, authorities can be biased. We have all seen examples of conflicting testimonies by expert witnesses in criminal trials. Like for example, in the one in the Desera case, right? So there's a group that says that this is a sexual abuse, while the other one is just really just a medical condition. And it's hard to really say which one is true when you have known experts saying conflicting things. And we have a lot of that, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, wherein there are some experts and doctors saying that this type of treatment or this type of prevention is good, and the other ones are saying otherwise, or a different treatment or a different method. So that is one of the pitfalls. While it's better than tenacity and intuition, there's still pitfalls, and there are still gaps in relation to just listening to an expert talk about their ideas about a certain question. And also, sometimes we place the expertise on not really scientific expertise, but on celebrity status. Like for example, when you hear people, or when you see celebrity sportsmen, they try to sell you or advertise, for example, sports drinks or sports supplements. Some people already feel that they are credible enough that you would believe them to buy whatever they're selling or they're advertising. But are they really experts to it? So again, aside from the fact that experts can have conflicting ideas about a given question, but also the issue of who is an expert is also an issue in the method of authority. So the fourth one is rationalism. The rational method involves seeking answers by logical reasoning. So we make arguments by presenting premise statements that describe facts or assumptions that we have about our reality. Like for example, premise number one, when a lot of people congregate in an area, there would most likely be high refuse or waste materials produced. Premise number two, there are many people congregating in a specific area when there is Olympics. So our argument or our final conclusion could be, that the Olympics could be a place or an event wherein it would produce a lot of waste materials. So this is an example of rationalism, wherein we try to connect two premises together and create a conclusion out of it. However, while this is much better, of course, in relation to intuition or tenacity, the problem here is that some of these rational assertions may need some sort of verification, because there are a lot of assumptions that we begin as we thought they're true, but when we actually do research, they're not actually true. Like for example, a recent research that I did, I tried to relate the anxiety with COVID-19 to the quality of life of students. And rational thinking would tell you that when people are more anxious about something, their quality of life will diminish. But lo and behold, when the results came in, when students have high levels of anxiety related to COVID-19, they would have higher quality of life. So again, the assumption might be true because there are a lot of supporting details in relation to it. But unless they are verified by actual cold hard data, they are not complete truths or established truths as we may know. And finally, and the highest of all, which is related to research, is empiricism, or we call it the scientific method, or simply research. So the empirical method or empiricism uses observation or direct sensory experience to obtain knowledge, and that's the example that I just gave you. For me to be able to really verify whether or not anxiety that is driven by COVID-19 really decreases the quality of life, I did a survey among thousands of students during the ECQ period. And what I really found out is that based on the verifiable data that I was able to collect from the students via a survey, that really anxiety could be a protective factor against decrease in quality of life during the ECQ period. And there are many possible explanations for that, but it welcomes future research in relation to it. Ika nga, the motto, to see is to believe, to measure is to believe, to test is to believe, is really true in the field of empiricism or research. And among the five, the best way of really establishing truth or knowledge about a given phenomenon is through empiricism. And of course, it all begins with, authority, tenacity, intuition, rationalism. But if you really want to pin down on what we really need to know as a fact, so that we can base our information and our behavior and our decision on them, you'd put your back on research. And this is one of the issues that we have in our lives. There are a lot of anti-research movements that we have. We have a lot of flat earthers, we have a lot of anti-vaxxers, because there is a decrease in confidence and a decrease in trust in the scientific inquiry. Of course, I'm not saying that science is all and be all, the greatest thing. But what I'm saying is that in order for us to be able to know if something really is effective or something is really helpful, there should be a lot of research studies that are backing it up. Like, for example, before we get to be injected by vaccines that are being presented to us now, we have to really check what's the literature of research literature telling us about the tests that have been done about the efficacy and the effectiveness of these vaccines. Or for example, you have these new things that are being sold in Shopee. Like, for example, you have your air purifiers that you wear around your neck, or there's a new style of masks or face masks, and they are claiming things like, for example, if you take this, if you use this, you will be protected from COVID-19. Or for example, if you drink this drug, you will lose weight, or you will gain a lot of muscle mass. Or if you drink this natural supplement from the leaves from this far-flung area, you will have healthier kidneys or healthier liver. Someone who relies on empirical data or has an empiricist way of thinking would look into research and look into what did tests and what did data tell us about how this specific leaf from a specific remote area is really affecting your kidney or your liver health or your sports performance before you even take it. Kasi ang hirap is that if you just rely on, for example, experts, the problem is when there's no verifiable data, they're most likely getting their knowledge from their own rational thinking, logical reasoning. And again, there are limitations to that, because this world has so many factors that can affect the way things roll out, and that's the reason why we do research, because we want to be able to understand and predict the world as it is. So yun, no? So as I said, the method of acquiring knowledge through empiricism involves doing and consuming research. So this now leads us to definition of research. And this one is my favorite definition among all of the things that I've read. No? So let me read to you this. No? Research is a systematic inquiry using disciplined methods to generate new knowledge and solve problems. So in order for us to be able to understand briefly the nature of research, let us piece by piece, understand this definition by segment. So let's begin with the word systematic. So research is systematic means it follows a step-by-step process, and we'll talk about that process in detail in the future, but basically it's asking the question or identifying the problem, reading about the problem, conceptualizing the problem into analytical components, and then trying to set up a method in order for you to be able to gather the data and to analyze them in order for you to address the question, and then collecting the data, analyzing that data, and then writing a report, publishing it, or presenting it, or utilizing it for use in the specific profession. So systematic, it follows a step-by-step procedure. Next, research is a form of inquiry. So it means that research begins with a question, research begins with a problem that demands to be answered. And usually the inquiry is very much based on the profession or discipline that you are based on. So kayo, from the sports studies department, you can look into the context of sport through different disciplinary inquiries like sociology, psychology, behavioral sciences, economics, political sciences, even biophysical sciences, because medyo wide naman ang range ng sports studies. But you can ask questions. Research begins with asking questions and identifying problems that needs to be addressed. Next, it uses disciplined methods. So, ibig sabihin, how do we answer the questions that we've posed in the beginning of the research? We use disciplined methods. We just don't, get data out of nowhere, but there's a reliable and valid way of collecting, analyzing data, of recruiting people to be able to answer your questionnaire. So it's discipline, you just don't do a survey. There's an art and a science of doing a survey. There's an art and a science of doing an interview. There's an art and a science of doing an observation, whether it's direct or participative observation. So in order for you to get verifiable knowledge out of your research, you have to do disciplined methods, and that is what we'll teach you later on in the course. How do we set up good methods so that the answers that we're able to gain from our research experiences to address the question is something that really can contribute to the knowledge and something that we can put our confidence in. And next is the two goals of research, and the main one is to generate new knowledge. So, di ba nga, sabi ko kanina, it is part of empiricism, which is a method of acquiring knowledge. So, it's very important that the research that you do is really contributing to the knowledge out there, especially in your case in the discipline of sports studies. And of course, equally important is to be able to solve problems in your field. So, to further appreciate research, let's look into the different characteristics of what makes a research. So the first one here is research is generated by a specific research question, hypothesis, or problem. So especially if it's quantitative research, we begin with the hypothesis, or in scientific method, we call that as an intelligent guess. Usually a hypothesis is made up of variables, and we'll talk about variables also later in this class, but we begin with the research question or a problem that we would like to address or answer. All right. Next, research follows a specific plan or procedure, the research process, and that is what I was talking about earlier, when I talk about research is systematic, it follows a specific process, and we will have a specific lecture just on the research process. So next, research aims at increasing understanding of a phenomenon by interpreting facts and reaching conclusions based on those facts. So we collect facts in research. We're going to be collecting data via a survey or via interview or via observation. And then in quantitative research, in order for us to analyze the data, we're going to use statistics. We're going to be coming up with values and numbers, and certain values will tell you if certain variables are related to each other, and if they are related to each other, is the relationship positive? Like if variable A goes up, will variable B go up as well, or vice versa? And then from there, we'll try to interpret what does that means and try to make conclusions out of it, and try to be able to understand that phenomenon more, because we're able to analyze from the data that we have gathered. Next, research requires reasoned argument to support conclusions. So that's the reason why you're having this at the latter part of your college, and you've had a lot of research subjects in your grade school and in your high school, because it's leading up to this, your ability to be able to use the language, English language more specifically, writing technical papers, writing research papers in your high school, and even in the early parts of your college, learning about the APA style, and also learning a little bit about philosophy, about logical reasoning. All of this you're going to use in order for you to be able to come up with research. So like I said, research begins with the hypothesis, and the hypothesis begins with some argumentations that we built because of the rationalist thinking. We have premises, and our goal in research is to be able to prove those or test those premises, by designing a research. And research is reiterative. It is based on previous research, previous knowledge, which aims to advance, but it may also develop further research questions which are answered by future research. So at the end of your research, you'll be posing new possibilities for research areas, and as you were inspired by the possibilities presented to you by previous research. So we build on the knowledge, and that's the reason why human knowledge is now more complex than ever, because of the many research that have been stacked upon on each other, talking to each other, conversing to each other, and that's the reason why we have relatively a better quality of life compared to hundreds of years ago. We have all these technologies because, from the simple physics research, that are the physics calculations, we now have GPS. And from the simple testing of materials by the engineers, we now have cell phones to hold, and now we're using cell phones in the field of the social sciences. So you can just look at how from very basic sciences we now are able to apply research on more soft sciences. And that's the characteristic of research. Research, they stack upon each other, they converse, and they and each research initiates or stimulates further research. So it's a never-ending cycle. It's reiterative, as said in this slide. So before we get into the specific details and the specific scientific terms in relation to the research process, let me just give you a brief background of the research process summary. So there's the stage before we collect the data, wherein the researcher decides, syempre bago ka mag-collect ng data, you have to decide on the research question. Ano ba yung gusto mong problemang i-address? The aim of the research, what is the purpose of the research, and ano yung analytical components para ma-address mo yung main goal mo in your study, which is also your research objectives. And then sometimes you will also have to look into a theory that will be able to explain yung mga ina-assume mo na relationships in between the variables that you want to test. And we will operationalize all of this in future studies. But basically, the first part is prior to the data collection, we have to conceptualize the problem first. We have to deduce the problem in such a way that they become better analytical components and that we are able to measure each analytical component so that we will be able to relate it using statistics in quantitative research, and then try to make analysis about it, and then be able to answer the question that we posed in the beginning. So yung una muna is yung pag-isip ng problema at pag-deduce ng problema. Next, stage 2 is the designing on how to collect the data, answer the question using which methods, sino ang sample, who is the people who you're going to be collecting data from, and the methodology that you're going to use in terms of instruments that you will use in order for you to be able to collect the data, the statistical tools that you will be using in order for you to be able to come up with results, no? And basically the design of your study. And this deserves a really huge chunk of this class, methodology. So like we said, no, in how do you answer the questions that you pose using research, you use disciplined methods, and you just don't do survey for the heck of it. You just don't do interviews for the heck of it. You just don't get people for the heck of it. But there is a science and an art in order for you to be able to get the most reliable and valid surveys, to be able to interview the best way possible so that you can get the most out of that conversation that you have with your participant. There are the best persons that you can collect or you can recruit for your study, and there's the best way that you can select them out of a group of people that is available for you to be able to generalize your findings to the whole of the population. So there's an art to each of it, and it's important that we're able to conceptualize this and be able to align it with whatever has been posed as the research problems. And then of course, when you already are able to set out a good, a reliable, valid way of being able to proceed with your study, then you will now go out into the field and collect the data. So the actual data collection stage, where the data is collected by one or more methods as stipulated in the methodology planning of your paper. And then of course we have the analysis of the data, whether either with reference to the theoretical framework or adopted, or to generate a new theory, usually for qualitative research, to achieve the overall aim of the research. So now you're going to use the data, make some analysis statistics for quantitative research, coding and pattern matching for qualitative research, and you're going to based from that data that you will now generate conclusions and address and answer the general question of the study. So the reporting of the research finally, and communicate the findings through publication or through presentation. So why do we undertake research? So one, we do that to investigate on some existing situation or problem. So probably by now, it's best that you are already thinking about what type of research questions and problems you would like to address for your specific proposals that you'll be creating in this class. But basically, that is why we do research, for us to be able to solve the problems that we have, so that we'll be able to have more control over our lives and more on the profession. So in the case of sports studies, it could be able to help, in relations to training, in relation to programs and policies and management, in relation to sport, and in other fields of sports, syempre. And of course, after being able to see the magnitude and the description of the problem, research can also help us provide solutions to a problem. So it could be, more interventions, policies, programs, in order for us to be able to improve the performance of athletes, for instance, or for us to be able to have a better sporting experiences in general, etc., etc. And to explore and analyze more general issues. Next is to construct or create a new procedure or system. So yun nga yung sinasabi ko kanina, no? We may be able to create new forms of interventions, treatments, trainings, programs, policies, in relation to sport, and then to explain a new phenomenon, especially if it's not yet very much explored. Like for example, how do athletes perform during an enclosed period such as in COVID-19 pandemic? To generate new knowledge, syempre, that is all what research is about, not to be able to generate and contribute to the knowledge in the discipline, or a combination of two or more of any of the above that has been described. Now, let me just orient you with the different typologies of research. So the first typology is based on purpose. So first one is exploratory research. So an exploratory research is a research that we do where there is little or no prior knowledge of a phenomenon. So when this is fairly new and no one has researched about this, or this is a phenomenon that just came in. So that's an exploratory research. So yun nga, an example of an exploratory research is, for example, asking about how student athletes are doing during this period in time of the pandemic wherein there are no sporting events. So how are they holding up? What is their sense of identity? Etc. So exploratory because it's a new phenomenon. There's not much research done about it. So yun siya. Okay, next we have the descriptive research. So descriptive research describes a phenomenon focusing upon the issue of what is happening or how much of it has happened rather than why this is happening. So for example, your research just wants to look into how many females or males have attended the Olympics. But not really explaining why there are more males attending the Olympics compared to females. Or for example, you just want to know how many trans individuals are really engaged in professional sports at the moment, but not really explaining why there is more or less of a specific trans identity in a given sport. So that's an example of a descriptive research. Or for example, just looking at the strategies that coaches use in order for the coach to be able to stimulate behavior change among their athletes, but not really explaining why. So it's really just descriptive. You're looking at the magnitude of how a specific phenomenon is distributed in a given population. The next typology is pure versus applied research. So pure research explores a particular concept or issue without regard for a specific problem. So if you remember yung definition natin, di ba, it's towards generating knowledge and solving problems. So if its goal is only to achieve the first one, generating new knowledge, then that's pure research. And maybe carried out to simply gain a better understanding of the overall concept. So it's not really towards changing or introducing a new intervention, treatment, not really to produce any product, program, or policy to be able to have an applicable application in practice. That's pure research. So it's really just to gain understanding of overall concepts so that people can pick this up and actually apply them, but not really, the research does not really involve the application of a treatment, program, policy, product, etc., or an intervention. Unlike applied research, which is undertaken to solve a specific problem or provide solution to a practical question. So the pure research question would be, for example, does the gender of the athlete correlate with, let's say, the aspirations for sports profession in sports, So that is the question, but there's no really practical application to that, But for applied research, for example, a seminar series, the effectiveness of a seminar series to increase the sports profession aspiration of student athletes. So this one has an actual program that you are testing in a practical reason for us to be able to see whether or not it will really improve the aspirations towards a sports career. So that's the difference between pure and applied research. Pure, you just want to understand things. Applied research, you want to apply or you want to address practical issues to question, test theories, or create create treatments, interventions, program, policies, products. The next typology is primary versus secondary research. So, the difference here is the data collected. So, for primary research, it involves the collection of original data. So, the researcher is the one who is collecting data for that specific project, while in secondary research, there's no original data collected and uses existing or secondary sources of data. For example, a census or an archive data. So, for example, for primary research, you go to the participants if you collect the data from them. Pagka secondary research, for example, there's a database of, for example, there's a lot of database that you have in relation to sports. For example, sa basketball, each player has already data in terms of assists, rebounds, steals, etc. And then there also have other personal information or demographic information like sex, saang state sila, anong team sila naglalaro, what is their racial profile, etc., etc. And you can probably correlate that, but you're not going to go to them and collect that data because the database is already available, but you were the one who collected it. It is a database collected by, for example, NBA mismo, but you can already analyze it. So if you're not the one who collected the data that you are analyzing, that's a secondary research. If you are the one who collected the data for the research that you're analyzing, that's primary research. Next, we have theoretical research and empirical research. So, theoretical research uses the findings from existing works to develop new ideas through analyzing and existing theory and explanations. This one uses more of the rational thinking, compared to the empirical research, which supports the development of new ideas by actually testing and collecting data based on observation and measurement, while theoretical research is sort of a research that collects previous research already, try to put them together and answer a question out of it, but you're not really collecting your own data. It is also good naman, it is also a very helpful research. Usually these are literature reviews and theoretical papers. But for empirical research, you are the one collecting the data, or you are working on a data set. So, empirical research. This is more verifiable, reliable, and valid compared to theoretical research. In your case, as students, you're supposed to be doing empirical research, for your thesis. And for this type, yung primary versus secondary, you're usually asked to do primary research because you have to exemplify or demonstrate your learnings in terms of doing or conducting the social research methods. Next, quantitative versus qualitative research. So, quantitative research is based on measuring variables for individual participants to obtain scores, usually numerical values, which are submitted to statistical analysis for summary and interpretation. So, and qualitative research is based on thick and structured texts and or making observations that are summarized and interpreted in a narrative report. So, in short, because we'll have more profuse discussions on this in the future. In short, quantitative research is about numbers and measurements, and qualitative research is about texts and experiences and visual data. When you say visual data, like pictures, like observations. But for quantitative research, it's more measurements, numbers. Okay, so the goal here is that the phenomenon or the variables that you are measuring must be able to be quantified. Ibig sabihin, pwede mong lagyan ng numero. So, of course, there are very obvious variables that can be numbered, or can be quantified. Like, for example, number of steps, number of assists, number of rebounds, number of people attending the Olympics. So these are numerical. But there are also some data that you have to use an instrument like a survey tool in order for you to be able to quantify. Like, for example, desire towards a sports career. It's a very social phenomenon. It's a very psychological phenomenon. But there are ways to quantify that using a survey, and then asking them in a scale of 1 to 4, 4 being the highest, to what extent do you feel like you are up for a sports career, and then they encircle or they shade 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's another way of quantifying the data. Unlike qualitative data, you use stories of people, you interview them, and not really, the aim is not really to quantify their experiences or quantify their feelings or emotions, but really to explore these emotions and see patterns across those people that you've interviewed. And also, we have to talk about what research is not. So, research is not simply the gathering of existing information. So, for example, yung kinikwento ko nga, NBA or PBA collects a database of the stats of their players. That's not research. No? That's just a database. That's just a collection. You can actually do research, by treating the stats as variables and then connecting it with the theoretical framework, creating hypotheses out of it, doing tests out of it, and then making conclusions out of it. But collecting the data per se, it's not necessarily a research. Kasi like for example, the registrar is collecting you so many personal data, demographic data as a student. Are they doing research? They're not. So remember that in order for you to do research, it's not just collecting data. It's posing a question and collecting data to answer that question and answering that question. And of course, just like the first one, it's not simply the collection of new data. No, it's not just a collection of data. You have to analyze the data. You have to read the data and interpret it. It's not setting out to prove an opinion or based on personal experiences. No, so like for example, the research idea that I gave you, for instance, I was setting out to not really set out, but the hypothesis was to really look into how anxiety affects quality of life, and I was able to see that it did not meet that expectations. But that is the truth, when you go into research, you have a hypothesis that you want to address, that you want to prove or establish, and you have to be ready that the data, when they're analyzed, they may not come and really support the hypothesis that you have posed in the beginning, and when that happens, you have to accept it, and you have to at least try to explain why these things happen. So is this a new area for research? Is this a new insight that you are seeing? So that's what that is what a good research attitude, being able to expect that your hypothesis may not be supported by your data, and being prepared that it could happen. Now, I am a firm believer that you don't just learn research when you go to a research class and listen to video lectures like this. There's so many things that you have to experience and be exposed to in order for you to really say, yes, I'm good at research, So, and one of the ways that you'll be able to learn how to do research is to read research. First, to locate and read a few articles from within a field that you are comfortable with. So when we say comfortable, there are, like for example, syempre, you might be reading on sports that are specific to the sports that you are engaged in, or a specific discipline within the sports studies. Like, you might be interested in sports counseling, or sports writing, or sports and gender, sports sociology, sports and politics, sports tourism, so that it's easier for you to consume the research while reading. It's good that you begin with those that you are comfortable with. And of course, read studies that are of interest to you. It's important to read the abstract first. So I don't know if you don't know what an abstract is yet, but an abstract is usually 150 to 250 word summary, executive summary of the study. And the abstract is kind of your window to the whole of the article, because it gives you a gist of what it's talking about. It tells you whether or not this research is going to be of interest to you, or you could use this in your own personal research, in your literature review. But you have to read the abstract first to just give a gist whether or not it's worth it's worth your time consuming it later. No, and then when you say na, okay, so this abstract interests me because this talks about the phenomenon that I'm interested in, you now identify the research question and objectives in that paper. So what was the research article setting out to do? What were the questions it was aiming to answer? And then you also look into why the researchers chose a specific setting or sample. Where did they do the research? And who did they select? How did they select the people that are engaged in that research, where they got they were able to collect the data from? Number 6, what were the methods chosen to collect the data? So did they use a survey? Did they interview? Did they do an ethnographic approach? Yon. What were the most important findings? So you'll be able to see that under the results and discussion session. Or what section? So what did they say? What did they find out? And do not be over concerned with statistical analysis. If there are many statistical tests that you see in their tables that you really cannot consume or really cannot digest, it's fine because the researchers are required to represent those tables using texts. So they will tell you that this is the value. Yeah, but what does that value mean? They're supposed to say that in the text. So if you are overwhelmed, then you cannot digest the stats, or probably you're overwhelmed with the highfalutin words, the jargons that they're using in quantitative and qualitative research. You can jump and learn. And then go to the summary of the results at the end, or you can look into the discussions that they already have, so that you will be able to appreciate what that research is saying, because at the end of the day, that is what you want to know. What did they find out, and not really. And of course, definitely later on, especially when you go to your other classes on quantitative methods, you will be able to at least understand what those tables mean. But at this point, you're more concerned of the analysis that they did, and probably later you'll be able to appreciate na yung mga tables if you would need to also make use of the similar tables for your own specific research. But don't be over concerned. It's very important also, especially for beginning researchers, to always have a dictionary by them, or at least be connected to the internet, so they can always Google on the jargons that they pass through as they read the articles. And of course, more importantly, be critical about the research. Like, what do you think could be areas wherein it could have had bias, or what are the ways wherein we cannot really verify if the conclusions and the assertions of the study cannot really hold water. But be very objective. Hindi naman when we read research and evaluate research, this is not like Rotten Tomatoes, wherein it is about the reviewer. It's not really about that, but it's more of reading it in order to see whether it's useful for you, whether or not it's giving you valid truth that you can use for your specific area. So, in this video lecture, you were able to learn about the ways of knowing, the definition and characteristics of research, the purposes of doing research, the process of research, the different typologies of research, and what research is not, and some tips in reading research.